My name is Rachel Monroe, and I can still feel the chill of that January evening in my bones. I'd been traveling for more than 30 hours straight, flying back from the other side of the world after burying the man I loved. My husband Ethan had been my anchor for the past 12 years. Now I was coming home alone, my suitcase stuffed with pieces of him. As the wheels of the plane touched down in Denver, I pulled out my phone and typed a short, simple message into my family's group chat. Flight lands at 6:15 p.m. Can someone pick me up? I stared at the screen, my heart thudding in my chest, hoping just for once that they'd rally around me. The reply came from my brother Brent in less than a minute. Busy tonight. Grab a lift. Seconds later, my mother chimed in. Why didn't you plan this out better? That was it. No, we're so sorry you're back under these circumstances. No, we'll figure it out. Just cold logistics, like I was some distant acquaintance, not their grieving daughter and sister. I typed back, no worries, but inside the words felt like acid in my mouth, because there was nothing about this that was no worries. What they didn't know, and what the entire city would soon find out, was that the worst part of my nightmare hadn't even happened yet. In just a few hours, my private grief was going to be splashed across the evening news, and the same family that couldn't spare a ride from the airport would suddenly be scrambling to manage how they looked to everyone else. Before I dive in, I want to pause here. If you've ever been let down by the people you thought would stand by you when life imploded, take a second to drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to rebuild from rock bottom, hit that subscribe button. Because this story, it's about survival boundaries and finding out who's really in your corner. Back in that cramped airplane seat surrounded by strangers eager to get home, I swallowed the lump in my throat and focused on breathing. I told myself it was fine that I could handle getting an Uber, dragging my suitcases, dealing with the freezing air outside. But a quiet voice deep inside whispered, "This is the last time you expect water from an empty well." I didn't realize then just how right that voice was. What waited for me beyond baggage claim wasn't just an empty welcome, it was the unraveling of the last fragile thread between me and the people I was born to. And once it snapped, there would be no going back. Before the cracks in my family's support were laid bare for everyone to see, there was a time, at least in my mind, when I believed I had something close to a perfect life. Ethan and I met in the most ordinary yet unforgettable way in the corner of a cramped college bookstore. He'd reached for the same copy of a used literature textbook, his coffee cup tipping just enough to send lukewarm liquid splattering across my sleeve. I remember the flustered apology, the way his hazel eyes crinkled when he offered to buy me a new book, and how that offer somehow turned into dinner that very night. By dessert, I wasn't just forgiving him for ruining my sleeve, I was wondering if I'd met someone who could change the course of my life. From there, we built everything together. After graduation, we moved into a small, sunlit apartment in Boulder. He landed a job as a software architect. I worked my way up in marketing, eventually becoming a director. We didn't have much at first, just a couple of mismatched chairs, a secondhand sofa, and a chipped dining table we rescued from a yard sale. But every item felt like ours. We shared dreams over late-night takeout, promised each other that one day we'd own a home with a garden, and planned the kind of future people write about in love stories. Eventually, those plans came to life. We bought a 2-story craftsman-style house on a quiet street. I filled the yard with hydrangeas and sunflowers each spring. Ethan installed a hammock between 2 old oaks in the backyard. Our evenings were a tapestry of routines: game nights with friends, Sunday hikes in the Rockies, movie marathons where we'd both fall asleep halfway through. We didn't have children yet, but we'd converted the spare room into a cozy home office, ready to become a nursery when the time came. Ethan was the kind of man who noticed the little things, how I liked my coffee, that my favorite pen always went missing, and that I never turned down a road trip if there was pie at the end of it. I loved him not just for the big gestures, but for those 1,000 small moments that stitched our life together. Looking back, maybe I clung so hard to those moments because they made me feel safe, anchored. I'd grown up in a family where my accomplishments were often overshadowed by my brother's sports trophies and my parents' social calendars. But with Ethan, I never felt invisible. He made me feel like I was the center of someone's world. That's why when the storm hit, when his health failed so suddenly and catastrophically, it shattered more than my heart. It cracked open the illusion that love and loyalty from the people closest to you are things you can depend on without question. But in those years before everything changed, I wasn't thinking about fractures or betrayals. I was thinking about our next trip, our 5-year plan, and whether we'd name our first child after my grandmother or his uncle. We were saving for a kitchen remodel, debating the merits of granite versus quartz, and laughing about how our old toaster always burned the last slice of bread. It was ordinary life, and it was beautiful. That's what made the contrast so brutal, how quickly the warmth of that life could be replaced by the cold, sterile reality of loss, and the colder still indifference from those who should have cared most. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see Ethan standing on our porch with a mug of coffee sunlight catching in his hair, smiling like he had all the time in the world. I didn't know then that time was already running out. Before we move forward, I want to invite you into this moment, with me into this love story, before the heartbreak. If you've ever had a relationship that made you feel truly seen, tell me about it in the comments. And if you believe that kind of connection is worth fighting for, tap subscribe so you don't miss where this story goes next. Because the truth is, those perfect days weren't just part of our past. They were the foundation for every choice I would make after everything fell apart. And they were the reason I was about to fight not just to survive grief, but to claim the kind of life Ethan always believed I deserved, even if I had to do it without him. It was late summer when Ethan came home with a grin so wide I knew something big was about to drop. He tossed his keys onto the kitchen counter, wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "I got it." I pulled back confused. Got what? He held up an email on his phone, an offer for a 6-month contract with a major tech firm in Sydney, Australia. It was the kind of opportunity engineers dream about: cutting-edge projects, a generous salary, and the chance to work alongside some of the brightest minds in the industry. My heart did a little somersault. Sydney wasn't just another city. It was oceans away. Beaches, a bustling harbor, a skyline that looked like something out of a movie. For a moment, the possibilities sparkled in my mind. Weekend trips along the coast, new foods, new friends, and a once-in-a-lifetime adventure. We sat at the kitchen table that night, the offer letter spread between us, our fingers brushing as we traced the details. Ethan would be based in Sydney for 6 months, with the possibility of an extension. I could arrange to work remotely for a few months and split my time between there and home. We'd have to manage the distance, but we'd done long stretches apart before. And this was bigger than both of us. This could set us up for years, he said, eyes bright with possibility. It's not just the money, Rach. It's the experience, the connections, the chance to see the world together. I believed him. And more than that, I believed in us. Within weeks, our home turned into mission control. We pored over travel guides, figured out how to rent out our house while we were gone, and made lists of everything we wanted to do down under. Ethan even bought me a wide-brimmed hat and teased, "You're going to need this for the Bondi sun." Our friends threw us a farewell barbecue complete with shrimp skewers and a playlist of Australian rock bands. My parents and brother showed up, but their attention, like always, drifted elsewhere. Still, I brushed it off. This was our dream, not theirs. The night before Ethan's flight, we had dinner at our favorite little Italian place downtown. Candlelight flickered across his face as he promised me that 6 months would fly by. "Then we'll come back here," he said, squeezing my hand. "We'll start that next chapter we've been talking about. Maybe even, you know." He gestured toward the idea of a baby with a sheepish smile. I tucked that hope into my heart like a secret. When the morning came, I drove him to the airport, our fingers laced tight until the very last moment at the security gate. I watched him disappear into the crowd, not knowing that it was one of the last times I'd see him walk toward me with that easy confidence. For the first 2 months, it felt like the distance was nothing. We video called every day, me with a cup of coffee in Colorado, him with the evening light of Sydney behind him. He'd show me the view from his apartment balcony, the bustling streets below, the way the harbor seemed to shimmer even on cloudy days. We made plans for my visit around the holidays, penciling in day trips and dinners. When I finally flew out to join him for 3 weeks, it was magic. Sydney was everything we'd imagined, the tang of salt in the air, ferry rides across the harbor, fresh seafood eaten with our hands. On weekends, we'd escape to nearby beaches or hike trails where the eucalyptus trees whispered in the wind. It felt like a second honeymoon, proof that we were exactly where we were meant to be. By the time I boarded the plane home, we'd started talking seriously about trying for a baby once he returned. It was a future I could almost touch, close enough to believe in. If you've ever stood on the edge of a life-changing decision, you know that mix of excitement and fear. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have taken the leap? And if you believe that opportunities are meant to be chased, make sure you're subscribed so you can see where this leap took us, because nothing about what came next was part of our plan. I didn't know then that one phone call was about to blow that beautiful future to pieces. The morning it happened started out like any other. I was back in Colorado cradling my coffee while Ethan's face lit up my laptop screen. He looked a little tired, rubbing at his temples. "Long night?" I asked, half smiling. "Just the usual," he replied, brushing it off. "Big project deadline coming up. Probably just stress." I teased him about finally taking up yoga, and he rolled his eyes, grinning the way he always did when I made that suggestion. We talked about what we'd do when he came home, maybe a road trip up the Pacific coast, before settling back into work. I didn't know it then, but that would be the last normal conversation we'd ever have. 8 hours later, my phone buzzed with an international call. Ethan's number flashed on the screen, but when I answered, it wasn't his voice. "This is Daniel, one of Ethan's coworkers," the voice said, urgent and shaky. "He collapsed in a meeting. They're taking him to St. Vincent's Hospital. You need to get here as soon as possible." The words didn't make sense at first. Collapsed hospital. My mind raced through 1,000 explanations, none of them serious enough to match the panic in Daniel's voice. I was online within minutes, booking the first flight to Sydney. The earliest seat I could get left in 6 hours, and even that felt like an eternity. I tossed clothes into a suitcase with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Somewhere in the chaos, I called my parents, praying for comfort, for something steady to hold on to. "Keep us posted," my mother said briskly, her voice already drifting towards some other concern. My brother muttered a quick "hope he's okay" before hanging up. The flight was a blur of recycled air and restless legs. Every time the plane jolted, my stomach knotted. I stared at the seat back in front of me, imagining Ethan lying in a hospital bed, imagining the things I hadn't said that morning. When I finally landed 32 hours after that first call, I went straight from the airport to the hospital. The hallways were bright and sterile, the air thick with antiseptic. A doctor met me outside his room, her face carefully neutral. "He's in a coma," she explained gently. "A brain aneurysm. We performed emergency surgery, but the damage—" She hesitated, letting the silence finish the sentence. Inside, Ethan lay motionless, his skin pale against the crisp white sheets. I took his hand, willing warmth into it, whispering about the garden back home, the road trips we'd take, the family we still planned to start. For 5 days, I didn't leave his side. I learned the rhythms of the machines by heart, the steady beep of the monitor, the hiss of oxygen, the mechanical sigh of the ventilator. Each morning, I'd hope for a flicker of his eyelids, a squeeze of my hand. Each night, I'd leave with the same hollow ache. On the 5th day, the doctor asked to speak with me privately. Her words were soft, but they hit like a hammer. "There's no meaningful brain activity. We recommend letting him go." I don't remember signing the papers. I don't remember the walk back to his room. I just remember sitting there holding his hand until it grew cold, and knowing that the life we'd built together had ended in a place thousands of miles from home. The hospital staff was kind, but the weight of being alone in a foreign country was suffocating. Every form I filled out felt like a betrayal proof that Ethan was gone. The calls back home were short and perfunctory. "We're praying for you," my mother would say, before mentioning how busy she was with her bridge club. My brother suggested I find a local service to handle things so I could come home sooner. But I couldn't leave him. Not like that. Not in a city where the only people who knew his name were coworkers. Have you ever had to make an impossible decision alone? If you have, share your story below. It might help someone else going through the same darkness. And if you believe no one should face that kind of moment without support, hit subscribe so we can keep talking about it here. That was the day I realized my family's pattern of absence wasn't going to change, not even now. But the full weight of that truth wouldn't hit me until I was back in the States. And when it did, it would break more than my heart. The decision to bury Ethan in Australia wasn't made lightly. It was made because I had no other choice. When the hospital's liaison explained the cost of repatriating his body to Colorado, I felt my stomach drop. The number was more than we had in our savings and would have wiped out every credit line we had. Our insurance covered some medical expenses, but the fine print on repatriation of remains left me with a harsh reality: bringing him home was financially impossible. The alternative was to hold the funeral there in Sydney, among people who had known him for only a few months. I called my family, hoping against all odds that someone might step in, that they'd say, "Don't worry about the cost, we'll figure it out." Instead, my mother sighed and said, "That's just too expensive on short notice." My brother mentioned a critical work project he couldn't miss, so I stayed. I navigated a city I barely knew, filling out death certificates, visiting government offices for stamps and seals, meeting with a local pastor about the service. My days became a blur of paperwork and exhaustion, my nights spent alone in a rented apartment staring at Ethan's neatly folded shirts on the chair. The funeral was small but dignified. A handful of Ethan's co-workers came, as did a few expats he'd met at a coffee shop near his apartment. We stood in the shade of gum trees, the air heavy with the scent of eucalyptus. I placed a photo of us from our trip to the Blue Mountains on top of the casket, a reminder that even here, far from home, our story had roots. When it was over, I lingered as the others drifted away. I told him about the hydrangeas I'd plant this spring, about how I'd keep the hammock up in the backyard, about the life we'd dreamed of. My voice shook, but I said the words anyway. "I'll carry you home in my heart if I can't carry you there in body." The days after the funeral were worse. Sydney's bureaucracy demanded certified copies of every document, each authenticated at different offices scattered across the city. I spent hours in lines that snaked through crowded corridors, my grief muffled under layers of official stamps and clipped voices. Each night I collapsed onto the bed in that unfamiliar apartment, the silence pressing in. I'd try calling home, but most times my calls went to voicemail. When my mother or brother did answer, the conversation was brief updates about the weather, about their schedules, as if the fact that I'd just buried my husband alone on the other side of the world was a minor footnote. That's when the memories started flooding back, the times they'd skipped my high school valedictorian speech to take Brent to a baseball game, the way they'd arrived late and left early at my college graduation, my wedding day, when my mother fussed over my brother's date instead of me. Standing in a foreign city with no one to lean on, I finally saw the pattern for what it was. This wasn't a bad week or bad timing. This was who they had always been, people who, no matter the crisis, couldn't or wouldn't show up when it mattered most. If you've ever had to stand in a room full of strangers to say goodbye to someone you loved, you know that hollow ache. Tell me in the comments if you've been there. And if you believe no one should have to face that alone, subscribe so we can keep building a space where people show up for each other. By the time my return flight was booked, I'd made a silent promise to myself this would be the last time I begged for more than my family was willing to give. But I had no idea how soon that promise would be tested, or how close I'd come to losing everything again before I even set foot back in Colorado. The night before I flew home, I couldn't sleep. My suitcase sat open on the floor, half filled with clothes gifts Ethan had given me and small pieces of our life together. I moved slowly, almost ritualistically, folding his favorite flannel, wrapping the watch I'd given him for our anniversary, tucking away the paperback novel he'd been reading. It felt wrong to be leaving him behind. The hours stretched into dawn, and I found myself back at the cemetery, the early light spilling over the rows of gravestones. The air was cool, the grass damp beneath my knees, as I set a bundle of fresh flowers at his grave. I told him I'd be back someday, that I'd keep living the life we'd planned, even if it was alone now. My flight home was brutal. A 6-hour delay in Sydney, an overnight layover in Los Angeles due to missed connections turbulence that kept the cabin crew strapped in their seats for hours. By the time we began our descent into Denver, I'd been traveling for more than a day and a half, sustained only by airport coffee and grief. Somewhere between LA and Denver, I decided to text the family group chat again, just to confirm my arrival. I wrote, "Landing at 6:15 p.m. Can someone meet me at arrivals?" Thumbs up emojis from my parents. My brother asked if I was bringing back any souvenirs. It was like speaking into a void. The truth is, I shouldn't have been surprised. My family had been consistently absent my whole life. When I was 8 and broke my arm, they dropped me at the ER with a neighbor so they could make my brother's championship game. When I got a scholarship to my dream college, my dad's first question was whether it would cost them anything. At my wedding, my brother arrived an hour late without so much as an apology. But a part of me had still hoped that losing Ethan, that the enormity of this loss would wake them up. That this time they'd see me. That hope died the moment my brother replied, "Busy tonight. Try Lyft." My mother followed up with, "Why didn't you plan ahead?" I sat there in that cramped airplane seat, surrounded by people eager to get home, and felt something in me shift. There's an exhaustion that goes deeper than physical fatigue when you've been trying to draw water from a dry well for so long, you finally realize it's killing you. This was the last time I'd ask them for anything. If you've ever reached that breaking point where you know you can't keep asking for care from people who can't give it, share your story in the comments. And if you're building your own boundaries, hit subscribe so you can follow how I built mine. When the plane landed, I moved through the terminal on autopilot, the fluorescent lights harsh after so many sleepless hours. My 3 suitcases, one with my clothes, 2 filled with Ethan's belongings, circled slowly on the baggage carousel. They felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried, each zipper holding memories I wasn't ready to unpack. I wheeled the cart toward the exit, my body aching, my mind still thousands of miles away. Outside, the January wind cut through my coat like it wasn't even there. I called a rideshare, watching the estimated fare climb because of rush hour. $78 to get home. The driver, an older man named Carl, made polite conversation asking about my trip. I kept my answers vague, afraid that if I told the truth, the dam would break and I wouldn't be able to stop. He seemed to sense it, switching on soft jazz and letting the silence sit between us. When we pulled into my driveway, the house looked exactly as I'd left it, yet somehow emptier. Ethan would never pull into that driveway again. The thought hit like a punch. Carl helped with my bags, hesitated like he wanted to say something, then just wished me well before driving off. Inside, the air was stale and cold. The thermostat was set low, exactly as I'd asked my mother to adjust before my return, but she hadn't. Mail overflowed from the basket by the door. My brother had promised to stock the fridge, but when I opened it, all I found were expired condiments and a container of something unidentifiable growing mold. It was the perfect welcome home from people who said they cared. And it was only the beginning of what would unravel in the days ahead. The first night back in my house, I couldn't bring myself to climb into our bed. It felt wrong, like the bed was a sacred space that belonged to us, and us no longer existed. Instead, I curled into the armchair by the upstairs window, still wearing my coat because the cold inside was biting. From that chair, I could see the corner of our bedroom closet. The door was ajar, and Ethan's clothes were exactly as he'd left them. Shirts on their hangers, shoes lined up neatly, his favorite flannel draped over the hook by the door. My family had promised to help organize his things, so it wouldn't hit me like a freight train when I came home, but just like every other promise, that one had dissolved into nothing. The next morning, I woke to a strange sound like a gurgling, muffled waterfall. At first, I thought I was still dreaming, but when I made my way downstairs, the noise grew louder. I turned into the kitchen and froze. Water was pouring from a large crack in the ceiling, cascading down the walls, pooling across the tile floor. The air was so cold I could see my breath. I sloshed through 3 inches of frigid water to reach the utility closet where the main shutoff valve was. My fingers burned from the cold metal as I fought to turn it. When the water finally stopped, I surveyed the damaged, warped hardwood in the dining room, sagging drywall water, dripping from light fixtures, a dangerous mix with the electricity still on. The pipe must have frozen and burst during the recent cold snap. My family had known about the storm warnings. My father even texted me before I landed to drive safe because of it. Yet no one thought to check the heat in my house. I grabbed my phone and started calling emergency plumbers. Each one told me the same thing: they were backed up for days because half the city had burst pipes. "We're looking at Tuesday at the earliest," one dispatcher said apologetically. Tuesday. It was only Friday. The temperature outside was plummeting again, and the storm was still raging. I called my brother. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding distracted. "Hey, I can't talk long. We've got clients coming over for dinner." "My house is flooded," I said, my voice shaking. "The heat's off, and there's water in the electrical fixtures. The plumber can't come until Tuesday. Can I stay with you for a few days?" Silence. Then, "Actually, tonight's not great timing. The guest room's full of Lisa's crafting stuff. Have you tried Mom and Dad?" I hung up before I said something I'd regret and called my parents. My mother's voice was syrupy but firm. "Oh, honey, you know we'd love to, but we're hosting bridge club tomorrow and your father's back is acting up. What about a hotel? You should have insurance for that." Insurance? As if that could replace warmth, safety, and the basic comfort of knowing your family won't leave you out in the cold, literally. If you've ever had someone turn you away in your moment of need, you know that sting. Drop your experience in the comments. And if you believe in showing up for people, subscribe. We need more of that in the world. By that evening, I was running on stale crackers I found in the pantry. My socks were soaked from wading through the kitchen, my fingers numb from the cold. The power flickered once, twice, then steadied. I decided to try the basement to see if I could at least get part of the heating system working. The stairs were slick with water, the air heavy with that musty, metallic smell of damp concrete. I turned on my phone flashlight, wading ankle-deep toward the electrical panel. Just as I reached it, my foot slipped and my palm hit the metal box. A jolt of electricity shot through my arm, knocking me backward. My head slammed against something hard. For a moment, there was nothing but darkness. When I came to, I was shivering violently, my right arm tingling something warm trickling down the side of my face. My vision blurred as I staggered toward the stairs. And that's when the beeping started, sharp, insistent, high-pitched. The carbon monoxide alarm. The house wasn't just cold and flooded, it was filling with poison. The beeping from the carbon monoxide detector pierced through the fog in my head, sharp enough to cut through the dizziness. My first thought was to grab my phone from the coffee table just a few feet away, but my body felt like it belonged to someone else. My limbs were heavy, uncooperative. I managed to half crawl, half drag myself to the couch, collapsing onto the cushions as the room seemed to tilt and spin. The air felt thicker with every breath, my chest tightening, my thoughts scattering like leaves in the wind. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew what was happening. The heating system, already compromised by the flooding, had gone wrong. Carbon monoxide was seeping in. It's a silent killer, no smell, no taste, just an invisible thief stealing oxygen from your blood. Lying there, I realized how absurdly alone I was. No one knew I was in danger. My family hadn't checked in, and they certainly weren't about to drop everything to see how I was doing. For a moment, a strange calm settled over me. If this was how it ended, at least I'd be with Ethan again. At least the pain would stop. But then there was a pounding at the front door, a sharp, urgent knock. A voice shouted my name, muffled but insistent. I wanted to answer, but my lips barely formed words. The knocking turned into a crash as the door gave way. Boots stomped through waterlogged flooring, and then strong hands were under my arms, lifting me. When I opened my eyes again, I was on a gurney, the freezing air outside biting at my skin as paramedics wheeled me toward an ambulance. One of them, a tall woman with a badge that read, Foster, was talking into a radio. Carbon monoxide poisoning, moderate hypothermia, head injury, possible electrical burn on the right hand. They loaded me into the back, an oxygen mask pressed over my face. The air was cool, clean life flooding back into me with every breath. In the hospital, they stitched the gash above my eyebrow, wrapped my burned hand, and hooked me up to warm IV fluids. Nurses flitted in and out, checking vitals, adjusting monitors. I was barely conscious when a young reporter appeared in the hallway talking to one of the paramedics. I caught snippets. Widowed, home-flooded family didn't help before the words slipped away. I learned later that the neighbor who saved me, Diane, from across the street, had noticed water pouring out from under my front door and called for help when she heard the carbon monoxide alarm blaring. She'd told the paramedics she'd seen me arrive by rideshare the day before and thought I looked completely drained. The reporter latched onto the story, how I'd returned from burying my husband overseas, been denied even a ride from my own family, and nearly died in my own home because no one checked on me. By that evening, the local news was broadcasting my ordeal, complete with quotes from the paramedics and screenshots of my family's text messages. Have you ever had a moment where your private pain suddenly became public? Share it in the comments because that shift changes everything. And if you want to see how the people in my life reacted to being exposed, subscribe now. You're going to want to hear this. I had no idea that by the next morning my phone would be buzzing nonstop, not with messages of concern, but with the fallout. My family, who had been too busy to answer my calls, would suddenly have all the time in the world, because now it wasn't about me. It was about them and the image they'd so carefully maintained. The hospital walls felt too bright, too clean, as I lay there breathing through the mask, knowing the storm outside wasn't the only one I'd have to weather. The one coming for me now was personal, and it was walking through the hospital doors. I heard them before I saw them. My mother's clipped heels striking the linoleum, my brother's voice pitched just a little too loud, as if rehearsed for an audience. They swept into my hospital room like they owned it all, polished coats and forced concern. "Oh, sweetheart," my mother said, her voice trembling just enough to sound believable. She leaned down, kissed my forehead, and glanced at the monitors as though checking to see if I was bad enough to earn sympathy. My brother stood at the foot of the bed, hands in his pockets, eyes darting between me and the bouquet of flowers he'd set on the table still in its plastic wrapping. I was still groggy from the oxygen and pain meds, but I could feel it, the shift. They weren't here because they suddenly cared. They were here because my story had made the evening news. You didn't have to make it sound so dramatic. My mother started smoothing the blanket over my legs like she could erase what had happened with neat hospital corners. Now the whole neighborhood thinks we're heartless. I almost laughed. You are heartless, I said quietly, my voice rasping through the dryness in my throat. My brother frowned. Come on, Rach. You could have called us instead of letting strangers think we abandoned you. I stared at him, the absurdity of it sinking in. I did call. Both of you. Silence. The kind that isn't empty but full of all the things they can't admit. My mother's jaw tightened. We were busy. You know how life gets. There it was. The excuse they'd been feeding me since childhood. Busy. Always too busy. Too busy for my piano recitals, my graduation, my wedding day. Too busy to help when I was stranded in a foreign country burying my husband. Too busy to save my life when I was freezing in my flooded home. If you've ever heard that excuse too busy from someone who was supposed to love you, you know how it carves into you. Drop your story below. And if you've learned how to live without that kind of love, subscribe. We're going to talk about what that freedom really looks like. The conversation didn't get better from there. My mother insisted they'd come now to support me through the press attention, as if that was the real emergency. My brother hinted that maybe I should make a statement to smooth things over, something about how I'd misunderstood how my grief made me emotional. That was the breaking point. I sat up straighter, ignoring the throbbing in my temples. You're here to protect your reputations, not me. And I'm done pretending otherwise. For a moment, they just stared. My mother recovered first, standing with her coat draped over her arm like she couldn't wait to leave. Well, when you're ready to be reasonable, you know where to find us. They walked out without another word, the door clicking shut behind them. The quiet that followed was different this time. It wasn't the heavy silence of abandonment, it was lighter, cleaner, because I knew I wouldn't be calling them again. As I lay back against the pillows, my phone buzzed with another notification, a new voicemail from a local journalist who wanted to follow up. Apparently, my story had hit a nerve. People from all over the state were flooding the station's inbox asking how they could help. And somewhere in that flood of voices, one message stood out, one that would change the next chapter of my life entirely. But that's a story I'll tell you next. The voicemail came from a number I didn't recognize, the area code somewhere in the Midwest. The voice was warm, steady, like someone who'd been waiting years to speak but was careful with every word. Rachel, you don't know me, but I knew Ethan. We met years ago before you two married. I saw the news last night and, well, I think you deserve to know something he once told me. If you want to hear it, call me back. I replayed it 3 times, trying to place the voice, but nothing clicked. Whoever they were, they'd used my married name, not my maiden one, which meant they knew Ethan after we met. For the rest of the day, the message gnawed at me. In a world where I'd been fed half-truths and silence from my own family, the promise of truth about Ethan, about anything, was like oxygen. By the time evening rolled around, I'd decided I couldn't not call. The woman answered on the first ring. Rachel? Yes, I said cautiously. My name is Lila. I worked with Ethan at his first job out of college. He was one of the good ones. I didn't know you personally, but I knew from the way he spoke about you that you were his world. She paused. The thing is, he once told me he was setting aside something for you, something no one else knew about. He was afraid certain people might try to interfere if it ever came to light. My pulse kicked up. What kind of something? Property, she said. A small cabin in Montana. Paid off in your name but listed under a trust. He wanted it to be your escape if you ever needed one. A cabin in Montana? My mind raced through every conversation Ethan and I had ever had about getting away from it all. How we joked about buying a plot of land where no one could drop by unannounced. Except, he'd actually done it. And never told me. I thanked her, my voice shaky, and she promised to send the trust documents and location details. He wanted you to have a place that was yours, where no one could take it from you, she said softly before hanging up. That night I lay awake staring at the hospital ceiling. My own family couldn't be trusted to offer me a couch in a storm, but Ethan, gone for weeks now, had somehow found a way to protect me from beyond the grave. If you've ever had someone leave you a gift of safety, even if they're no longer here, tell me about it in the comments. And if you want to see what I find when I finally get to that cabin, hit subscribe, because what's waiting there isn't just peace, it's a revelation. By morning, Lila's package was already in my inbox, scanned copies of legal documents with my name printed in neat black type. I'd barely started scrolling through them when a nurse poked her head into the room. "Discharge orders are in," she said with a smile. "We'll have you home by noon." Home. The word didn't feel right anymore. That house in Colorado was full of water damage, poisoned air, and memories that now felt like ghosts. But maybe home wasn't where I thought it was. As the nurse wheeled me toward the exit, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Lila or a reporter, it was my mother. I stared at the screen, her name glowing like an alarm. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice was icy. "I've been told you're planning to sell Ethan's things. If you do, certain family members will be very upset." I almost laughed. "You mean the same family who left me to freeze and nearly die? The same family who wouldn't even help bring him home?" "I'm just saying," she replied, "people talk. You don't want to make this harder than it already is." I hung up before she could finish. Because for the first time I realized something. I didn't have to keep living in their version of my life. Ethan had given me a way out, and I was going to take it. What I didn't know was that getting to that cabin would be anything but simple, and the obstacles weren't just from my family. 2 days after leaving the hospital, I was standing in my kitchen, still damp in spots from the flood, staring at a road map of the western United States. My finger traced the route from Colorado to Montana, a line of highway cutting through snow-covered passes and lonely stretches of plains. It wasn't the best season to drive north, but the thought of staying here another week made my skin crawl. The house reeked faintly of mildew despite the industrial fans humming in the background. My insurance adjuster said repairs could take months. And every time my phone buzzed, it was either another half-hearted just checking in from my parents or a passive-aggressive comment about what the neighbors were saying. I decided to leave. Not eventually, not soon. I meant tomorrow. I booked a rental SUV with snow tires and a full tank guarantee. I packed light Ethan's leather jacket, my camera, a few changes of clothes, the documents Lila had sent. Everything else could wait. Before locking up, I walked through each room one last time, flipping off lights and pulling shut doors. When I got to our bedroom, I paused. Ethan's flannel still hung on the hook by the door. I took it down and slid it into my bag. The next morning, the sky was a flat, pale gray as I pulled onto the highway. The miles fell away in quiet stretches, broken only by gas station coffee and roadside diners, where the waitress always called me Han. The farther I got from Colorado, the easier my chest felt. Still, I couldn't shake the tension. My mother had called again the night before, leaving a voicemail that began with, "I don't understand why you're running away," and ended with, "Don't forget, family is forever." It was almost laughable how quickly people will claim you when they feel you slipping out of their control. If you've ever been accused of running away when all you were doing was protecting yourself, share it in the comments. And if you've ever found freedom in leaving, subscribe, because the next part of this journey is all about that. By the time I crossed into Montana, the scenery had shifted. Jagged mountains rose on the horizon, their peaks dusted with snow, while wide valleys stretched out like an open invitation. Cell service grew spotty, and the road signs became less frequent. It was beautiful, but there was an edge to it, the kind of beauty that could turn dangerous fast if you weren't careful. I stopped for gas in a small town called Pine Ridge, the kind of place where the grocery store doubled as a post office. The man behind the counter eyed my Colorado plates and asked if I was visiting family. When I said no, just checking on some property, he gave a slow nod, like that explained everything. As I pulled away, my phone buzzed once, just enough signal to deliver a text. It was from an unknown number. "We need to talk about the cabin, before you get there." No name, no context. I pulled over, heart hammering, and typed back, "Who is this?" No response. For the rest of the drive, the text sat on my mind like a weight. Was it someone from Ethan's past? A neighbor up there? Or worse, someone who didn't want me to arrive at all? The sun was sinking low by the time I turned onto a narrow road that wound through dense pine forest. Snow crunched under the SUV's tires, the air outside crisp and sharp. Finally, after nearly 12 hours on the road, I saw a cabin tucked between tall evergreens, its roof blanketed in snow smoke, curling from the chimney. Except, I hadn't arranged for anyone to be there. And through the front window, a shadow moved. The sight of movement inside the cabin jolted me so hard, I slammed the SUV into park without even realizing it. My breath fogged the windshield as I leaned forward, squinting through the dimming light. The figure passed by the window again, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the ease of someone who belonged there. But no one was supposed to be there. I killed the engine and sat still, the silence pressing in. The only sound was the faint hiss of cooling metal from the car. My first thought was to call the local sheriff's office, but my phone showed no service in mocking white letters. I tried stepping out, holding it high like that might magically summon a signal. Nothing. The snow under my boots crunched loudly as I made my way toward the porch. Each step deliberate, my pulse thudding in my ears. The cabin was beautiful, dark wood siding, heavy shutters, but in that moment it looked like a stranger's stronghold. When I reached the door, I noticed the lock was intact, no signs of forced entry. My hand hesitated on the knob. If this person had a key, what did that mean? I knocked hard. The footsteps inside paused. Then the door opened, and a man in his late 40s stood there. His face was weathered, eyes sharp, but not unkind. He wore a flannel shirt and work jeans, the kind of clothes that looked worn in, rather than bought to impress. "You must be Rachel," he said, like we were picking up a conversation from years ago. I froze. "And you are—" "Name's Tom. I was a friend of Ethan's. Been keeping an eye on the place." He stepped back, gesturing for me to come in. "He told me if anything ever happened, you'd find your way here." Inside the cabin was warm, the scent of burning wood wrapping around me like a blanket. The fire crackled in the stone hearth. A kettle hissed softly on the stove. Part of me wanted to believe him immediately, but another part, the one honed by months of grief and betrayal, kept my guard up. "Why didn't you call me? Or, I don't know. Let me know someone was living in my cabin." He gave a slow shrug. "Ethan didn't want too much said over the phone. And I wasn't living here. Just making sure it was ready for you. You've been through enough." It was a nice sentiment, too nice. Have you ever met someone who knew more about your life than they should? Someone who steps in like they've been waiting for you? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you want to hear the truth about who Tom really is, subscribe now. Because the truth isn't what I expected. I set my bag down but didn't take off my coat. "So what exactly do you know about Ethan and this place?" Tom's gaze flickered toward the fire. "Enough to know he trusted me, enough to know he didn't trust a lot of other people." That hit me harder than I wanted to admit. Ethan had trusted so few. Why this man? Why not tell me himself? Before I could ask more, Tom reached for a small tin box on the mantel and held it out to me. "He left this for you, said you'd understand when you saw it." The box was dented, the metal cool against my hands. I hesitated before opening it, aware that whatever was inside might shift everything I thought I knew about Ethan, and maybe about why he'd kept this place hidden. When I finally lifted the lid, I didn't see money or jewelry. I saw a folded map, edges yellowed with age, and a single Polaroid photo of Ethan standing beside someone I didn't recognize. And the person in the photo was wearing the exact same flannel Tom had on. I stared at the Polaroid until the edges seemed to blur. Ethan looked younger in it, maybe mid-20s, his smile, easy arm slung over the shoulders of a man who, there was no denying it was Tom. Same sharp eyes, same broad frame, same flannel shirt worn in exactly the same way right down to the crease at the collar. The room felt smaller, the crackle of the fire suddenly too loud. "Care to explain," I said, holding up the photo, "why you're in this picture with my husband, and why you're wearing the same shirt years later?" Tom didn't flinch. That was taken the day Ethan closed on this property. I was the one who found it for him, helped him get it off market under the trust. We were closer than most people knew. Closer how? He leaned against the mantel, his gaze steady. "We worked together once. Not the kind of work you put on a resume. Ethan didn't want you tangled in it." A chill crept up my spine, and it had nothing to do with the snow outside. "What kind of work?" Tom took a breath like he was choosing his words carefully. "Let's just say, your husband had a knack for helping people disappear when they needed to. Bad ex-abusive boss, crooked debt collector, he found ways to give them a clean slate. This cabin. It wasn't just an escape for you, it was a safe house." The weight of his words pressed down on me. Ethan, the man who'd tucked me in at night, who'd leave love notes in my lunch bag, had been running a safe house and never told me. Tom must have seen the storm on my face because he added, "He didn't tell you because it wasn't safe for you to know. The less you knew, the less anyone could use you to get to him." I sank into the armchair by the fire, the tin box still in my lap. Alongside the map and photo, there was a folded letter. My hands shook as I opened it. Rachel, if you're reading this, I'm gone. You need to know the cabin is yours, but it's also a promise I made to protect the people who had no one else. If you can't stay, that's okay. But if you do, you'll understand why I kept it secret. Trust Tom. He's the only one who knows everything. E. I read it twice, the words blurring in places where my eyes welled up. Have you ever discovered a secret about someone you loved? One that made you see them in an entirely new way? Tell me in the comments. And if you want to find out what was on that map, hit subscribe, because what it leads to changes everything. When I handed the map to Tom, he spread it out on the table. It was hand-drawn, marked with a series of red X's winding deep into the forest north of the cabin. Each X was labeled with initials and dates. These, he said, tapping the marks, are people Ethan helped. Locations where he left supplies, sometimes cash, sometimes documents. There's one more he wanted you to see, the last one. The last X was dated just 3 months before Ethan's death, and it had my initials next to it. I looked at Tom. Why would he mark my initials? Tom's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did a flicker of hesitation, maybe even warning. That he said quietly is something I can't explain until we get there. The fire popped behind us, sending a cascade of sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. And in that moment, I knew whatever was at that last X wasn't just a message from Ethan. It was a test. The morning broke cold and bright, the kind of Montana winter day where the air bites your lungs clean. I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Tom shoveling the path outside. The map sat on the kitchen table, the last red X burning in my mind like a beacon I couldn't ignore. Tom came in, stamping snow from his boots. If we're going, we need to leave soon. Weather's turning tonight. I nodded, pulling on layers: thermal shirt, Ethan's flannel, a down jacket. Tom packed a thermos first aid kit and what looked suspiciously like a small revolver into his pack. My eyes flicked to it, but I didn't ask. The trail started just past the cabin's tree line, winding through pines so thick the sunlight barely touched the snow. Our boots crunched in rhythm, breath clouding in the sharp air. For the first half hour, Tom kept the conversation light, stories about fixing the roof last summer, the time a moose wandered onto the porch. But the closer we got to the mark on the map, the quieter he became. Eventually, we reached a clearing. At its center was a low mound of snow, the shape too deliberate to be natural. Tom brushed it away, revealing a wooden hatch with a heavy padlock. My pulse quickened. What is this? Ethan's last cache, Tom said. He wanted it left untouched until you were here to see it. The padlock clicked open under Tom's key. We lifted the hatch to reveal a small underground chamber lined with shelves. Inside were sealed containers, each labeled with a date and a name: supplies, canned food, water, first aid kits. But on the far shelf sat a single metal case different from the rest. My initials were etched on the top. I crouched, hands trembling as I undid the latches. Inside was a thick envelope, a flash drive, and a leather-bound notebook. The envelope held a deed not for the cabin, but for another piece of land hundreds of miles away in my name. The notebook was filled with Ethan's handwriting, page after page of notes, names, and instructions. But the flash drive, Tom looked at it like it was dynamite. You need to know, he said slowly, if you plug that in, there's no going back. Ethan kept files on people, dangerous people. My guess is this one's about someone connected to you. A cold weight settled in my stomach. I thought of my family, their sudden interest in what I did with Ethan's belongings. Are you saying... I'm saying Ethan probably found out something they didn't want you to know. Have you ever stood on the edge of a truth so big it could blow up everything you thought you knew? Share it below. And if you want to hear what was on that drive, you need to stick around, because it's not just family secrets. It's a target. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of snow. Tom glanced at the sky. We should head back before it closes in. We sealed the hatch and retraced our steps, my mind racing with possibilities. By the time we reached the cabin, the first flakes were falling. Inside, the fire blazed, but I couldn't shake the cold in my bones. That night, I sat at the table with my laptop, the flash drive between my fingers. I thought about Ethan, about the trust he'd placed in Tom, about the lengths he'd gone to protect me. And then I thought about the knock that might come at the door once I learned what was on it. Still, I plugged it in. The screen lit up with a single folder labeled with my family's last name. The folder opened to reveal dozens of files, PDFs, scanned letters, even audio recordings. My hands hovered over the trackpad, heart pounding. I clicked the first document. It was an internal memo from a mid-sized contracting firm, one I recognized instantly. My father had worked with them for years. The letter detailed payment arrangements to secure government contracts complete with signatures. My father's was one of them. I opened the next file. Bank transfers. Large sums moved quietly through accounts in my brother's name. Dates matched with times when my family had made suspiciously generous donations to local charities. Tom leaned over my shoulder, eyes scanning the screen. Ethan wasn't just keeping this for curiosity. He was building leverage. Leverage against my own family, my voice cracked. He nodded. They're the kind of people who hide behind respectability. But this is criminal. And if they ever knew Ethan had it, they'd have done anything to get it back. I swallowed hard. It explained everything, the sudden hostility after Ethan died, the pressure to hand over his belongings, the not-so-subtle warnings to stay quiet. They'd been afraid I'd find this. One audio file caught my eye. I clicked play. My father's voice filled the room, calm and deliberate, talking about making sure Rachel doesn't get curious and shutting down any loose ends. My stomach turned. I sat back, the weight of betrayal pressing down like a physical force. This wasn't just neglect. This was deliberate. Tom's voice was quiet. You have a choice. Turn this over to the authorities and watch their world burn, or keep it, use it when you need it. I stared at the screen, every instinct screaming for justice. But justice wasn't simple, not when it involved people who'd raised me however badly. I closed the laptop slowly. I'm not letting them dictate my life anymore, but I'm not playing by their rules either. If you've ever had to choose between exposing someone or protecting yourself, you know the cost. Tell me your story in the comments, and if you want to see where this choice takes me, watch my next video because this fight isn't over. We locked the flash drive in the tin box and buried it beneath the floorboards, hidden but not forgotten. Outside, the snow was falling harder, blanketing the cabin in quiet. For the first time in months, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I had answers now, ugly ones, yes, but they were mine. No more second-guessing, no more hoping my family would be anything other than what they were. That night, as the fire died down, I thought about Ethan's last act, not just leaving me a place to escape, but leaving me the truth. He'd trusted me to decide what to do with it. In the morning, I'd start planning. Maybe I'd rebuild my life here in Montana. Maybe I'd take the fight to them. Either way, I wasn't running anymore. Because now they weren't just my family. They were the opposition. The storm cleared overnight, leaving the world outside glazed in white and gold. Sunlight spilled through the cabin windows, catching in the frost, and making the snow sparkle like 1,000 tiny diamonds. For the first time in what felt like forever, I woke without a weight on my chest. I wrapped myself in Ethan's flannel and stepped onto the porch. The air was sharp but clean, so clean it almost stung. Out here, miles from the people and places that had defined my life for so long, I could feel the edges of a new beginning taking shape. I thought about the girl I'd been before all this, someone who believed family loyalty was unshakable, someone who thought love meant turning a blind eye. That girl had been broken open, but maybe that was the point. When something breaks, you can choose to patch it back together the same way, or you can rebuild it into something stronger. Ethan had given me the tools to choose: the cabin, the truth, the space to breathe. I knew the road ahead wasn't going to be simple. My family wouldn't just fade into the background. The knowledge I held could change everything, for them and for me. But for now, I let that fight wait. Because peace isn't just about escaping what hurts you. It's about standing somewhere safe and deciding what comes next. As I stood there, the wind carrying the scent of pine, I whispered a thank you to Ethan. Not just for the cabin, but for believing I could handle the truth. And as the snow glittered in the morning light, I realized I already had.